A very good evening to all. NIPM Kerala chapter welcomes everyone who's connected on this call to a session on competence and confidence building, better business for a better world. Today, to talk on this topic, we have Perry Trims with us. Perry Timms is the founder and chief energy officer of PTHR with 30 plus years of experience in people, learning technology, organization change and transformation. In 2022, he was ranked number one, the most influential HR thinker by HR Magazine. His personal mission is to see more people flourish through their work and help shift organizations as a force for societal good, not just profit machines. Two books are on his credit, titled Transformational HR, and this was published by Kogan Page, and The Energized Workplace, published in August 2020. His first research report of PTHR, titled The State of HR, is published with HR Zone, taking 40 white papers, thought pieces, and research into an aggregated view of the challenges and future direction of the people profession. He was on the list of HR most influential thinkers for the years 2017, 18, and 19. In 2021, he was named the most influential HR and transformation professional by Corporate Vision magazine. Perry Timms is a chartered member of the CIPD, advised them on HR's use of digital and social media, and was a guide for the 2013 CIPD HR Hackathon. He's worked along with Professor Gary Hamel's Management Innovation Exchange. His client work now includes organization design and development, project and work effectiveness and efficiencies, self-managed and agile systems, behavioral change, business transformation, and creating innovative ways of working, delivered through close collaboration with HR and OD teams, change agents, and innovation teams. He's a global and TEDx speaker, advisor, and conference chair on the future of work and HR, and a member of the Be the Ripple movement to promote kindness and eradicate bullying in workplaces. He is a visiting fellow at Cranfield Management School and Sheffield Hallam University, a fellow of the RSA. He has been a guest professor at GEA College in Slovenia, and he's part of the adjunct faculty at Ashridge Executive Education and guest professor at Hult International Business School. He's also an associate at the Work Foundation, helping create the principles of good work in an uncertain world. Perry Trims is on a mission defined as better business for a better world. To interact with him on this session today, we also have Anil Kumar Ji, business coach, Action Coach USA, official council member, Forbes Coaches Council, founder and managing director, Action Rich Business Solutions India Private Limited. He's the executive director, BNI Global, Cochin area, India. And he's also an executive member of NIPM Kerala chapter. On behalf of NIPM and on my personal behalf, I welcome both of you to this discussion. Over to you, Anil sir.
Thank you very much, Anu. A very happy evening to everyone. Once again, a warm welcome to all the participants to this program. A very good afternoon, Perry, and a warm welcome you to this wonderful session. And my job is to actually give some leads to the topic. As we all know that today's topic is competencies and confidence building, better business for better world. We all know that in today's rapidly changing business landscape, organizations are increasingly realizing the importance of building competencies and confidence among their employees to drive growth and success. With this in mind, we at NAPM Kerala chapter invited Mr. Perry Timms to address us on competencies and confidence building, better business for better world. So our discussions will mainly focus on three key aspects: people, profession, and process. There are critical that are critical to achieving the goal of better business for a better world. Under people, we explore energy at work, teams, and something called job crafting. Interesting. Profession delves into impact, hack, design, and agile, while process covers HRPB, hybrid by design, learning, people strategy, technology HR, and learning. Mr. Peritemps will take us to understand these key elements to create better business for better world and will enlighten us to create more skilled, motivated, and agile workforce that is better equipped to drive positive change in the world. With a lot of excitement and curiosity, I now invite Mr. Perry to lead this session. Welcome, Perry.
Welcome, thank you, and yes, good afternoon and good evening. I mean, it's terrific that NIPM have extended the invitation to me to come talk to you about something which I think I'm more than passionate about, and I research and I experience whatever I can around the areas of how we create the future or futures, if you want to think about it like that, as options. And better business for a better world is the kind of strapline for my enterprise. We're based in the United Kingdom. We are global in our reach. There are only 10 of us, and we work very flexibly, very different fashions. We're currently a certified B Corporation. We are a 4-day operating week organisation and have been for 3 years. We're a living wage employer, and we are, I guess, active in trying to create as much competence and confidence in our clients so that, as we say, they start with us but succeed without us. So that's our kind of principle. So I have got some slides to work through, and I'm very happy for you to also kind of bring in some interactivity through the chat streams and so on. So look forward to hearing about that. So yeah, thanks very much. Okay. So hopefully that's on screen. Yeah, there we go. So I lifted that wonderful graphic. Thank you very much for doing that. Yes, we've both got impressive biographies. Of course, all of those things that were read out, I don't do them all at the same time. So they are a succession of things. But you may have heard the phrase a portfolio career. I believe it was coined as a phrase by the eminent management thinker Charles Handy. I guess that's what we're starting to see a lot more of. People constructing a portfolio of job and career options, to the point that you mentioned earlier on about job crafting. We'll cover that. So yes, I find myself multidisciplinary. I find myself operating in areas to do with technology, psychology, business modeling, all sorts of things. And I think that's a kind of symbolism of how complex the world is, in that we as individuals have to be competent and confident in a number of different areas. Specialisms are great. And being a subject matter expert is terrific, but I think there's also a breadth of things that we need to become familiar with. So what I'll do today is talk you through, I think, the world as it's shaping up and how we react to it. So I'll start with a question, really, which is, how optimistic are we about the future, and do we have hope? This list that you see on screen: wars, climate crisis, ecological and agricultural collapse, pandemic, digitization, cybercrime. These are things that we could find ourselves incredibly anxious about, incredibly concerned about, because it feels like we have an absolute cluster of problems that perhaps we didn't have 5 years ago, and maybe we certainly didn't have 10 years ago. The World Economic Forum recently declared that we are in a state of polycrisis, so literally a multiplicity of crises, and therefore we have a lot of challenges all at the same time, taxing our thinking, taxing our energy, and forcing us to be creative, inventive, and apply ourselves differently. So should we have cause for optimism? I'll hopefully help you understand why yes, we should. Now, several years ago, some American anthropologists and scientists and researchers started to spot a pattern in the way the world shifts and changes. And they went back as far as the sort of 1700s in American history, and perhaps even a little bit further back across the rest of the world. But they spotted a cycle that they have now started to term as turnings, or slightly more grand term, seculums. Blocks of time where the world and the way we live our lives and the way we work and what we learn and how we advance, I guess, our thinking and our maturing as societies, these blocks of time tend to have a cycle. And that's what this screen talks to. We have an enormous amount of new discoveries. And you think about things like electricity, telecommunications, combustion engine, and so on. Well, I mean, we've literally seen massive shifts and changes brought about by new discoveries. I mean, the fact that I'm in London right now and I'm talking to you in India simultaneously, and you can see and hear me, and so on. It's almost like we've compressed the world, we've collapsed time, and we've created some really interesting ways to interoperate using technology as an example. Now, they often then lead us to a sense that we have a kind of an awakening about what those new discoveries have given us. Not always that those discoveries are hugely positive. Let's take, for example, the social internet. It was an amazing thing that we could connect with friends around the world, and we could all find ourselves on platforms like Facebook and Instagram. And then we saw, particularly during some political campaigns, how that technology could be used in a manipulative behavioral science kind of approach to influence things like our voting decisions and our political allegiances. So we have some awakenings to do with this, and we start to want to equalize, balance, and almost understand how we can get the due and proper outcomes from things like this. Then we have what's called unraveling, where things start to collapse. So I think we can think about the Great Depression in the 1920s, particularly in the United States. We can start to think even about more recent crashes, where we are talking about things like the 2008 financial crisis. So we see these things where it falls apart and things shift, and there's danger and potentially damage, which then leads to potential crises like we're seeing now: war, collapse, revolution. Now, the good news is that cycle then allows us, almost like a forest fire, to regenerate, to reborn, and to create a new start. So this crisis is normally immediately followed by a new high and a new sense of discovery, and then we go through those cycles again. So what is being predicted by the American researchers who found this phenomena, William Strauss and Neil Dowd, is that we are in crisis right now, and we probably will be for another 3 years before we start to see the new discoveries taking us to a new level of operation, life, and so on. So there is that going on. So that's why I think we need to hold on to a sense of optimism and be very comfortable in our competencies now and as they emerge, because that's something we're headed to. But what I'll do is I'll talk through a few of these patterns myself that I've seen and start to see how we can then create more competence and confidence in ourselves as we go forward. Now, if we look at work, so work has gone through turnings even in my lifetime in the world of having employee and so on. We had pretty much state-controlled work, and then we had free markets. And we've seen recently the rise of prominence in things like unicorns and high investment startups. And now I think what we're starting to realize is that there is a consciousness to business that is starting to become more evident and applies to the mission and the nature of this talk, Better Business for a Better World. That business isn't just there to create revenue. It isn't just there to build products. It is there to serve a purpose that's within communities and the planet itself. So we can look to examples like Patagonia, who are a sportswear manufacturer, but who do enormous amounts of work for planetary regeneration and sustainable business practices. Now, we also look at things like who was at work. It used to be the kind of male domain exclusively, and then it was perhaps mixed, but more dominantly still men. Now we see much more of the sort of gender balance within the workplace, to the point that absolutely we see leading figures and specialists and astronauts and so on of any gender at all. It's gone from male dominated to being much more inclusive. Still with work to do, but we see much more balance already coming in. And then we see where work was done. Now, predominantly in the industrial era, it was factories. And as we started to move into the sort of service economy and knowledge economy, it was office. And the knowledge economy is given over to the e-commerce and the digital economy. And now we literally have work is anywhere you want it to be, unless you have to physically look after a property or a human being in a true sense. So we've got this kind of almost disaggregation of where work is, unless you're kind of making something. And even then, there are examples where engineers can be working at home, running robotic factory production lines. They don't even have to be in the same premise. So there's definitely still more to come when it comes to automation. So that's how work has gone through some turnings. And if we look at us as an evolutionary kind of society, I suppose, we've seen institutional frames of reference. So that's kind of bureaucratic, dogmatic, and almost like very, very sort of state control again, through to industrial power. And I guess the industrial kind of drive behind economies. So that's where we get much more materialistic and what I guess we could describe as rationalistic. There's a rationale for everything. But we are starting to see a move into much more humanist and relativist approaches. So we are more about our place in communities and families and units and enterprises. But we're also now seeing an emergence, which ironically I think is a return to what we describe over here in the West as Eastern philosophy of more synergy and integrative approach, kind of being at one with the world and being really strong on the spiritual side of things that doesn't necessarily conform to a prescribed religion. So we're definitely seeing some turnings in how we're evolving. We seem to care more about things that are deeply philosophical, spiritual, and not necessarily practical and materialistic. So in people, we're seeing some turnings too. And here's another example of that. We used to talk about diversity as the makeup of our workforce being diverse, people of different age, gender, social caste, and so on. Now I think we're already seeing the move through inclusion, which is how we make sure it isn't just about numbers, but how people can express difference and be different, neurodiversity being one, caring responsibilities being another. Beyond that, even to equity, where people really do feel like they have the same chance to succeed as anybody, despite perhaps certain characteristics or traits that may make it difficult, like a disability. On to things like belonging. So you really, really feel part of something. It is beyond a transactional job to earn an income. You really want to change the nature of the service you provide and the support to other people. And that links to purpose. What are we here for? Not just to create revenue, but actually to do something of huge value in a number of different ways. And I'll talk to you about that later. Onto this concept I absolutely love and I've included in my mission, the state of flourishing, where you absolutely feel a sense of joy, fulfillment, appreciation, wellness, balance, all about work, life, and everything in between. So I think we've seen even that agenda shift significantly in the last sort of 20, 30 plus years. So going to my professional field then, and I know something that's of interest to you, the HR profession, even this has a number of recognisable turn-ins. We've gone from industrial relations, which is really where we're sort of working in a unionised environment and kind of almost boss management team and employees in a kind of competitive arm wrestle for power and control and determination, into personnel, a little bit more sophisticated. Learning and development came into it, psychometric and psychological understanding, through to things like business partnering, which is much more about get the business, you need to get the people, let's kind of bring that together, create more harmony, unity, understanding, and so on. Into, I think, our next turning within the HR world is where absolutely understand and leverage the power of the meaning of what you do, where you do it, how you do it, who you do it for, who you do it with. This whole sense that things have much more meaning to people rather than simply transactional exchanges through work. So yeah, we've seen turnings in HR. Now let's look at some of the ways we can start to think differently then. And these are potentially a new set of competencies and I guess confidence building techniques. But we all know Microsoft, and we all know their current leading steward figure, Satya Nadella. Now, Satya Nadella has inspired a turnaround for Microsoft, who have gone from a kind of traditional software provider into a multiple kind of pioneering organization, but also a hugely attractive employer with diversity, with inclusion, with a strong sense of connectivity to a mission. And he was inspired by this work from Oxford Said Business School professor Colin Mayer, who wrote a book called Prosperity, which was bringing together lots of, I guess you'd say, progressive economic theories into a sense that we don't talk about profit, we talk about prosperity, because prosperity can mean prosperous life, prosperous health, prosperous communities, prosperous planet, even. And so the six value lenses that are in this book, I think, are an important way of us starting to develop competencies and more confidence in how we describe what value really is, because it isn't just about monetary or financial value. There are all sorts of intangible and tangible links through human value. So that's how strongly you support each other and look after each other's interests and so on. Social value, how you connect, join forces and create more than the sum of the parts. Natural value, so that's our ecosystem and our kind of systems of life and our sort of ecological and planetary support. Intellectual systems, our knowledge, our learning. And then material systems, the things we create that we can reuse and we can regenerate, and kind of circular economy rather than wasteful economy. So I think there's an enormous amount of work we can do to help our businesses, particularly in our individuals, work towards prosperity, not just profit. And we need to use these six lenses to calculate what value looks like in different ways, because they all lead then to sustainable financial value. I talked about meaning earlier on, and this is work from a Dutch and a New Zealand kind of duo who started to create something called the map of meaning. This might help us understand, actually, when we're starting to understand a little bit more how powerful the meaning of your work is, how we can actually start to construct that in a sort of theoretical and applied sense. So this map has, I guess, the sense that there's you, others, what you do, and how you are. So that's what these kind of four axes kind of mean. And I guess the sense of meaning comes from you understanding more about yourself and the interactions you have with the system of work, the people you work with, and so on. So what are you in service of to others? How do you create unity with others? How is it all integrity based to yourself, who you are, what you value in life? How do you express potential, and how do you go about doing that? So I think there's something of a developing competence here in how we can appreciate what is the meaning in the work I do and who I am and how I express that and how I continue to create value during that. Because I think there's some proven research that says more purpose-led businesses outperform those who are perhaps simply profiteering in terms of sustainable performance, in terms of human value, and in terms of economic value. So there's a real strong sense that this is a direction we need to travel. And then, of course, linked to that, and there's a multi-billion-dollar industry in leadership development that you could argue hasn't quite got to where it needs to with the strength of leadership that we need. And I say strength not in a kind of hero power dynamic, but in holding things together and in bringing people together and in making wise decisions. And I think what we're starting to see now from leaders like Satya Nadella as a good example is that it is all about being clear about what's happening now, what are the priorities now, what's our future trajectory as far as we can tell, and how are we going to set that so that we can all head in that direction as soon as we possibly can. That allows us to make more choices, both individually, collectively, and then sort of organizationally, and put our energy to the right things, the right outcomes, the right determinants, and the right kind of philosophies that sit within that, all linked to a strong sense of compassion. Now, that compassion is towards our fellow humans, to our close team members, but to our families and our communities and our country and our planet. There's an enormous amount of leadership that I think will start to come through about how we create planet compassionate leadership. I think that will be something to watch for. So again, there's competencies in that to watch out for. Now, this bit I get really excited about because when I'm talking to people about my professional field being HR, they often say things like, so you must be a people person. And I'm like, well, I am, but I'm also fascinated by this. I'm more fascinated perhaps by the systems of work, systems of life, systems of education. So this is an example where organizations are starting to adjust how they are represented, structured, and enabled from traditional cascade hierarchies and very functional silos into a much more integrative, fluid, and multi-connected entity. And the three words I've got in here that I guess, again, are sort of competencies to look out for are about understanding evolution, not just change, not just transformation, but evolution, your continued attention to improvements, better, and a stronger sense of purpose and success factors. The energy that you need in order to continue to work in changing, shifting, adaptive, complex environments. And then the phrase entropy is from the chemical world, actually, that we have tried to create low entropic states for our organizations by bringing everything together and really compacting it and tightening it. Now, some research from INSEAD and Harvard Business School, so this is Michael Y. Lee and Amy Edmondson, into hierarchical organizations, has actually found that during times of turbulence and uncertainty, hierarchical organizations are slower, more clumsy, and less effective at adopting change that's necessary for them to perform and survive. Whereas more fluid, matrix, and responsive structural setups absolutely cope in a much more dynamic way. And that's the kind of example you see in front of you here with the kind of nested circles, the interlocks, the interplays, the overlays. It's almost three-dimensional more than just a hierarchical pyramid. So I think we'll see a lot more of that. So evolution, energy, entropy, in a sense, a revised modeling is a competence to be much more aware of. And then I think linked to that is a more responsive and dynamic operating environment. So we already can see a number of changes in the technology world brought about by the adoption of Scrum and Agile approaches. And I think that's what we're now starting to see coming into knowledge work and even very formalized project work is much more iterative, adaptive, and very responsive and self-directed teams who deliver success in short bursts, measure, test, learn, adapt, release. And I think we'll see a lot more of that. So again, I think there's some competencies about understanding Agile in the true sense of sprints and scrums, and then understanding Agile as a concept and a mindset to be responsive, adaptable, and manage complexity through that kind of fluidity. And I think there's another key competence in understanding really what goes on in teams, because I think teams have been, I guess, the sort of under-leveraged success criteria within organizations. We've often talked about heroic, high-potential people and leadership dynamics, but really the real power comes in a cohesive team. And Richard Hackman's research over 40 years from Harvard Business School has really, really given us the sense that these 5 factors are where we need to strengthen team competence and team confidence. Absolutely know where you're going as a team, that direction, that sense of future possibilities as clearly defined as possible, and that you're supported by a strong structure. That doesn't mean it's fixed. That doesn't mean say it's rigid. It just means you feel strongly supported in whatever kind of structure you have, and that it's adaptive as much as it is rigid. That you actually operate in a supportive context with each other. So this again will talk to things you might know about, like psychological safety and use of emotional intelligence. I think those are absolutely what we need to think about here. And I know my colleagues on this call will be pleased to see that competent coaching is in there. And absolutely the strength of a team is being able to coach each other and adopt the role of coach as well as colleague. I think that's absolutely going to be a strong competence in the future. And that you're a real team. You're not just a group of people together. And so there's something about who are we as a team and how do we kind of define how we want to be together in order to do this kind of strong delivery work that we're about. So yeah, team competence, absolutely crucial. And if you want to know a kind of a top 10 list of skills, I did this research, as was mentioned in my introduction, around what's going on in the HR world, and undeniably, what I wanted to do was give us a sense of what are the real competencies of now and next that we can start to focus on, and that's what this 10 list is here to do. And interesting that the top one, bearing in mind it was a couple of years ago, but I suspect is still really relevant, is that value creation I talked about and performance analytics. It is, do we really know how well we perform and in what ways, and where value really is created, and where value can be amplified, multiplied, and boosted by us knowing more about our performance factors, I suppose, and our elements. And then things like psychology and behavioral science, experience design, data science, they're not a surprise that I think they're in the top 10. But certainly within the whole world of technology and systems, we've got things like design and code engineers, meaning makers I mentioned earlier on. And again, my colleagues on this call will be pleased to see the psychology of learning absolutely in there, not just learning and development, but deeply understanding how do we learn? How do we learn in a chaotic world? How do we learn in a world where we've been fed mistruths and we're not sure what is real anymore? And how do we learn in a way that is not time pressured and is much more about adaptive and responsive and iterative and small and aggregated? And I think that links to agility. So if you want to know where the skills are to focus on, I'd go with those 10 as my recommendation. Now, in the introduction, a number of things were mentioned about work that we do in people and transformational HR. We recognised during the pandemic that actually what businesses need to do is not just recover, not just rescue themselves, but reinvent themselves. So we created some smaller but nonetheless pretty powerful, what we called labs, business simulations, looking at things like hybrid working, business partnering, looking at people strategy, looking at creative thinking through hackathons, understanding your impact and energy. And these are things where we are assembling our consultancy offer to people, and we're trying to bring them these smaller, almost like build it yourself kind of programs, rather than a start, middle, and end traditional kind of consulting approach. We wanted this to be very co-created. So that's what we've been doing, and we've won some awards, and we've actually helped clients create capacity, build their confidence, and actually get ahead of the curve on the future. So that's where that kind of thing comes into play. And we've also created this model to understand that sense I talked about earlier on, of really the whole thing of life is, are you living a flourishing life? That's almost the question of what's the meaning of it all. Are you flourishing? And as a result of it, are you flourishing in an organization that itself is flourishing, because all its people are flourishing? So is this a business model? It kind of is. Is it also an appraisal tool? Is it also an engagement tool? Is it also something where we can absolutely see that there is a destination that is not just an arrival, but a continuum? And it's this. Meaning I've talked about earlier on, I've talked about design, and you'll see in the middle we've got some of the recognizable people practices like development, recognition, inclusion. But ultimately, the systems we have and the energy we put into our work through these kind of mechanics and these kind of interventions should enable us to discover who we are, what we're all about, find the meaning that drives us, and commit ourselves to a state of almost perpetual flourishing. And that's my aim and aspiration in the work that I do. And then just to leave you with a sense of where I think the HR profession's going, you may recognize the three elements at the top of this diagram of shared service, center of excellence, which is like learning development, employee relations, and so on, and business partnering. And I think that's a model that's been brilliant to help us get to this point, but I think needs a revise. And so I've used the kind of emergence of Web3 to talk about the potential for HR 3.0. And so this model helps us focus on what I think are the four main playing areas for people professionals and for change and leadership in that sort of dynamic. And that's the systems we operate, the processes that come from that, the people who need to be in that system and use those processes, and the products that we build that help them get to that state of flourishing. Learning development programs, employee relations, engagement and fulfillment, innovation, and so on. and then a whole new range of roles in HR, again, to create a whole new competence set. Performance analysts, psychologists, practice leads, and again, coaches are in there, meaning makers, people operations, relationship brokers, and product managers. And I think that's where I'm hoping HR will kind of set its North Star and start to work towards much more of that modern, dynamic, but nonetheless, I guess, highly valued functions across the business world. And I'll just leave you with this quote, because I think this kind of sums up what our most optimistic kind of value and competence should be. That Don Tapscott, who's an author and the exec chair of the Blockchain Research Institute, gave us this phrase: not an information age, it's an age of networked intelligence. And so if there's one competence I think to leave you with, it is not how strong and how intelligent are you, but how strongly connected and how intelligent is your network, because you will just be a result of and an enabler of that collective sense of intelligence. And on that note, I will stop the presentation and happily see if there's any questions or thoughts from anybody in the audience, and very happy to welcome you back, my friend.
Thank you very much, Perry. I think very in very short period of time you have enlightened us
Thank you.
that how purpose-driven organization can change or make or create value for the world.
Yes.
So I think we shall yeah, moving from the money making mindset to the purpose driven businesses, where the purpose drives all other
Yeah.
competencies and the confidence building activities. So there were
Yes.
a lot of comments in the chat box. I didn't see any um, questions in the chat box, but people have been appreciating
Yeah, it's
the
nice that there's some feedback, right? That's good to know, because I guess
yes, yes, definitely.
what I will probably say, and maybe it prompts questions, is that this is what I'm portraying here is a pretty big departure from how we've operated up to now to how we could operate in the future. And people might be saying, where are those signs coming from? I think when we look at things like the healthcare industry, which is now starting to kind of get into biotechnology and the advances within that, is
Exactly.
also starting to explore the fact that it absolutely needs to create more high touch humanistic care as well. So I think there are models proving that. And then I guess when we look into the green energy world, there's an enormous opportunity there to help us create that sort of net zero thing, but then start to actually repair the planet and start to put things right. Because if you live in certain parts of the world at the moment, arguably not the industrial West, you are looking at rising sea levels with a huge degree of fear, and we need to return to a place where we can settle that back down. So I think that's the point of it all.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
think even sufficient natural education, nature's education already happened
Yeah.
to make sure that we focus more on the planet
Yeah.
before we think about anything else. So
Yeah.
that is where the purpose-driven organization concept comes in, because
Yeah.
the more you go with money, definitely the answer the result will be destructive businesses,
Yeah.
because it is we need to make sure that the businesses are more constructive in
Yeah.
all sense,
Yeah.
especially in terms of people, planet.
Totally that.
That comes next is the profit part of
Mm.
it. So
Mm.
I think that's it. And
Yeah,
before I
absolutely.
forget, Pari, I really love your designation, um,
Yeah.
Chief Energy Officer,
Yeah. Thank
as
you.
if you're handling the biggest powerhouse in the world.
Yeah.
Resource, correct.
Yeah,
So I
exactly.
love that, and
Yeah, thank you.
so
There,
there are
there
so
are actually two books written by
many.
two independent people, one in Germany, one in the US, and they're called Chief Energy Officer, as almost like the reframe of the Chief Executive Officer. And I actually can really understand that, not just because I've chosen that title, but if you're the Chief Executive, that kind of makes you sound like a bureaucrat and nothing else, right? But if you're the Chief, like, Inspiration Officer, like Satya Nadella is at Microsoft, you are the energy officer. You are creating the power, as you rightly describe, within your people, almost to a quantum level, right? There's kind of no limits when human beings are inspired, motivated together. The rest of the equation ends up with watch out for the positive outcome, because that's what we can do. But equally, we can be destructive too. So the energy bit is about making sure it's channeled. Yeah.
Kari, you mentioned a lot of things which is related to leadership in larger organizations and
Yeah,
also very well seasoned organizations.
yeah,
Whereas in we know that the economy is mostly dependent on even the smaller organizations,
yeah,
semi-sector organization, where this kind of awareness is very
yeah.
less. What do you think that how can we create awareness in those kind of organizations which
Yeah.
are lesser compared to? Yeah.
I mean, that's a terrific question, and you're absolutely right about the number of organizations headed up by entrepreneurs, and they are quite small. There are high volumes of those. And then we have the smaller number of huge multinationals who employ a lot of people. So it's almost like there's a volume of small businesses and a volume of people who work in large businesses. I think the future has to have a relationship and an ecosystem that those two come together much more actively and productively. And I don't just mean merge and acquisition and buyout, I mean a participative ecosystem. Because what we do know about large organizations is they have huge reach, huge capitalization, and can have a massive impact on the world. And we know that smaller organizations are often more humanist, nimble, creative, inventive. You need those two things operating together, but the big organizations find it difficult to do that, and the small organizations find it difficult to achieve scale. So we just need a way to bring more of those people together in that environment. Now, there are some examples of where that happens, where you create ecosystems and you bring in entrepreneurs and you don't subsume them within the belly of the beast, so to speak. You keep them as adjacent, adjunct, and almost like catalytic stimulators. So some of the banks I know in the UK are doing that. And also in the manufacturing world in China, Hire, as a white goods manufacturer, has an ecosystem where it has micro enterprises. These are all under the Hire banner, but they've got independent, impartial, innovative ways of serving customers and creating products. That's what we need. So I agree with you about the need for small industries to adopt some of this pioneering and kind of scale related leadership, and they don't have to sell out. I think they can coexist in an ecosystem with the larger entities, get the best of both worlds. So I want to see more of that, and I think I'm starting to appreciate that it isn't just about subsume and acquire; it is cooperate and coexist.
Yeah, I think when we talk about the purpose-driven
Yeah,
businesses, maybe this also is one of the driving forces for large organizations to
yeah,
collaborate and co-create along with the smaller organizations,
absolutely,
and
absolutely.
that can be part of their purpose,
Mm,
so that the
mm,
ecosystem, like you mentioned,
yeah,
the ecosystem exists to co-create and collaborate.
yeah,
Definitely. But otherwise, what happens? It always seems that the smaller organizations are dependent on the larger organizations.
yeah,
Instead of that dependency, maybe a co-creating environment can be created.
yep,
Even incorporating many of the things that you mentioned about the revamped operations or
yeah,
the recharge teams. So
yeah.
those kind of things can also be
Mm,
very, very effectively used in smaller organizations.
mm, mm, yeah,
I didn't see. Yeah, there is one question that is coming from
yeah. This is a great question.
Dr. Yebi Elias. How much this is replicable,
Yep.
and does it clash with the culture of the organization, especially with it is a traditional one?
Traditional
When
one.
it's a traditional one, yes.
Yeah, I mean, that's a terrific question, Dr. Teller. So I will answer that by what I know of the current energy sector, particularly in Europe, is obviously thinking about green energy futures and petroleum oil based legacy energy systems, extractive versus regenerative and sustainable and renewable. What they've done is they've actually created two tracks within their business, one which will reduce, which is the consumption based, and one which will increase, which is the renewable. Now, there are some people who are in the legacy organization, if you want to call it that, who absolutely know that they've only got a certain amount of time before that industry is switched off. However, these are people who've got the experience and are perhaps coming to the end of their career, so they're happy to see it out that way. Others have made the move over to the renewables, and so it's not just renewable is better, is almost like, well, we need the two until we can absolutely sustain renewable energy. So even big organizations can create some very strong distinction between past and future and operate within the same kind of environment and brand. But I'm also seeing this, I guess I'd call it sort of culture leverage, where people are starting to understand that the culture they have has been built up over years, and therefore the culture they want is going to take a long time to work on as well. But that doesn't mean to say that you shouldn't then invite people to go, can we create the kind of culture change that gives us more dynamic, responsive, creative? And that results in processes being changed, leadership lines being done very differently. So I've seen some companies who have taken managerial responsibility away from specialists by saying, look, you didn't want a team to manage, you wanted to be a super researcher, so we want you to do that. And we've got other people who are brilliant at people leadership, and actually they can come together and work in that sort of environment. So I think we're starting to see some of that separation from the industrial model being worked on, particularly in the tech industry. I see it in biotech. I'm seeing it in agri-tech. So I think there's something of a turning that's going to happen there. So I think naturally cultures will come into play and will be sometimes resistant to that change. And I'm seeing organizations, I'm talking to a very big motor manufacturer in the UK at the moment, putting culture and the whole dynamic of relationships and empathy and trust before they start to change the systems and the mechanics. So they're getting the kind of people bit first, and then the change that follows through. So I can absolutely see that happening, Dr. Tellis, and hope that's answered your question.
Thank you, Perry, and thank you, Dr. Fellis, for asking the question. And here is another question called, can you please elaborate on the job crafting that you mentioned?
So this is not my concept. So I've adopted what's out there from other people. So there are organizations, if you search under job crafting, who will give you the kind of chapter and verse. But why I believe in it is that for too long, the role of creating a job description, shall we say, is often a collaboration between the HR team and the line manager, or just the HR team in itself. And what I've seen is lots of people have come into that kind of going, well, I get the job description because that's what I was recruited to. But now I'm doing the work, this job description and the work I do bear no resemblance to each other. So can I change it and adapt it to what I know it now is? We don't ask that question enough, except when we've got job crafting as a principle, that we allow people to kind of redefine, adapt, adjust, and almost rebuild their role in that sort of sense. So we kind of decentralize job creation definition, and we give it to an individual to kind of personalize, but also look at replicable nature across an organization. Now that's been taken to another level by a professor from University of Southern Cal, John Boudreau, and a guy called Ravin Jesusathan, who have written a book called Work Without Jobs, which is actually saying the job really is a kind of defunct concept of the industrial era. We all do work, and that work often varies, and we need clarity on what we're there to do. But to try and squeeze it into a number of replication jobs is probably not what the current world might need. So they advocate the sense that we have some kind of core responsibilities that we're there to do, but that we constantly fine tune what would be described as our job. And that's job crafting as well. It's very responsive, very emergent, very experimental, but it's much more about people having the say about the lines of success and the lines of impact that they are there to create.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you. Yeah. Very one thing, something that comes to my mind is that when it comes to competency and confidence building,
Yeah.
what the some of the hindrances are some assumptions and beliefs people carry,
Yeah.
whether it is large companies or small companies. They
Mm.
carry a lot of assumptions and beliefs which they are not able to break, because of which they're not able to get into the next level of purpose.
Yeah.
What is your views on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's an absolutely terrific mention. So thank you for that. And I think what happens in the kind of world of culture, but also in our behaviours, is that we assemble a series of narratives that we believe are absolutely true to us and that we kind of live by, but they are still constructed narratives. Now there are other layers that sit within that. There are sort of, I suppose you'd say, natural tendencies and preferences. That's almost like at the most subconscious level. And then there's the kind of goals we set ourselves, our ideologies, that kind of thing. So what I would advocate there is that we need to go beyond that narrative of those assumed qualities or practices or habits, and go into the sense of why are we here? What really matters to us? And that kind of question I talked about, meaning and purpose, and then go into the and what am I naturally inclined for? Am I deep and analytical, or am I creative and kind of adventurous and experimental? And start to think about that as a way of reframing what you're there to do and what impact you have, to break the constructs of past kind of tendencies and habits, whilst being respectful of all the things that stabilize you when you're changing. So I'm not advocating that you completely blank everything and start again. I'm saying really stress test the things that are going to give you stability and value in the future, and those things that you're just habitually connected to, but you can't answer the question whether it's stabilizing or value creating in the future, those get rid of and adapt and change. The things that are stabilizing and creating value, you will stress test them, you will know that they've got relevance, they might need some adaptation, but go with those. So I think it's an individual, team, maybe functional and organizational construct. It needs to kind of be built in all of those dynamics. But I think without it, we will do what I describe as change theatre rather than change practice.
Sure, great. Thank you, Pari, for that.
Ajay.
Ajay has mentioned. Would like
Yeah,
to know more about the
THR.
THR or THR?
Yeah, yeah. There are two aspects to this. One is the T stands for transformational HR, and I think that's a space that HR needs to create and go into much more, rather than administration and employee relations and learning and development. Transforming and being transformational is, I think, a declaration, an act, and an impact assessment. And within that, I think there is the chance for us to be much more aware of the change readiness, the change fatigue, the success, and so on. So that's part of what THR means. It's how do we shift from being a functional and even stabilizing HR function to a transformative and transformational HR function. So there's definitely those qualities and those skills I talked about earlier on, that 10, they're part of it. That model I showed you with the products, people, processes, and systems, that's part of it too. The other thing the T stands for is the T shape. And we often talked about T shape as the top of the T is a multitude of competencies and capabilities that you have, and the trunk of the T is where you go deep in expertise. That might be that you're a terrific financial analyst, and that's where you go deep. But you're also good at KPIs. You're good at performance management. You're good at feedback, and you're good at presentation. They go across top. Now the THR is also that actually, instead of a kind of a single vertical and the horizontal cross, we've probably got to have a much thicker top of the T to compensate for the fact that we need to be more adept and skillful in a number of areas rather than just one. So I think that's saying to us, if we can be really good at employee relations, we also need to know employee emotional intelligence. We need to know about the psychology of conflict. We need to know all sorts of things. And I think that's where the thicker top helps us be more adept in a complex world. So that's what the THR means. Two things: transformational and that thicker T.
Yeah, absolutely. Because HR, the significance of HR is not limited to the workplace alone. It
No.
goes beyond that, and also it goes to the business, as well as it again goes to the community and the society as well.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. HR's reach. I mean, I love HR's reach across an organization because it's everywhere, wherever people are, it is. But it's increasingly going beyond that into, like you say, the marketplace, the community, so that we can see about our sort of future talent by literally being present in schools and education and understanding that dynamic. And then I think when we get to perhaps the end of careers, I think there's a part in how we transition people out of work into more community and social and impact work that isn't just underneath the corporate agenda anymore. So I think we've got a broader remit, and people will go, wow, I mean, HR's got enough to do, why add more in? It's like, it's people. It's people and evolution. And I think there's something about, we've probably been too boxed in, even though it feels busy and complex. We should be absolutely start to transition end of people's working lives. And I think that's a good thing.
Thank you. Actually, I don't see any other questions and all. I think I feel that you have triggered many minds through these
Good.
discussions, and definitely the participants will agree with me that um, over the next few days we'll continue to think through
Yeah.
this topic, this competence and confidence building, and better
Yeah.
business for business, better world.
Yeah.
And definitely HR has got a bigger role to play in that process. We deal with human minds as well as their work as well. So
Yeah.
definitely a lot of points to ponder around, and also to uh, also triggered a lot of triggers
Great.
are there which will help us to think through and bring
Fantastic.
out many transformational interventions in the HR profession as well. So
Yes.
definitely, being an HR professional body, NIPM and its members
Yeah.
definitely got benefited from this evening session.
Thank
And
you.
I take this opportunity once again. Thank. If there is no other question, Ajesh, is there any other question that has come up, so we can think about closing, so that we close on time? Terry, any other message that you would like to give to?
I think the final message is that really what matters to people is most important, and that could be their wellness, their family time, as well as their working life. And I don't see anything wrong in us helping people balance super impactful and I guess you'd say fulfilling working experiences and the whole of the rest of their life, because I think the way work is at the moment kind of tolerated by a lot of people, engagement levels are pretty down. That's just not how it needs to be. So I think we've got this opportunity to create not work-life balance, but just a balanced life, and that includes how we get a lot from our work and how we put a lot into our work in good measure. So I'll just leave it with that. It's almost like a noble cause to sort of position work as a really strong redeeming factor, not a tolerated element.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you very much. Let us close this program with that message to the audience as well as to the participants, and those who are going to listen this session. So thank you very much, Perry,
Thank you.
for your wonderful session, your insights, the knowledge that you shared. We from NIPM Kerala chapter, we are definitely looking forward to many more sessions with you.
Thank you.
Definitely look forward to learning more from you.
Thank you.
And thank you, Anu. Anu is also there. Anu, so over to you, Anu. Thank you.
Thank you, Anil. And yes, it's been an absolute delight listening to you, Perry. I have personally a lot of takeaways. I really loved the way you started off, mentioning about the poly crisis, the
Yeah.
multiplicity of crises that we have today, and all of us are going through the different turnings that we have all been, experiencing, like the work, evolution, people. And I really loved the term meaning makers. I think
Yeah.
that's something really awesome for all HR
Nice.
professionals to hear
Yeah.
about. Uh, that's great. I think the LinkedIn profiles of a lot of people are going to change now. They're going to be
Meaning
meaning
makers.
makers.
Beautiful.
And yes, it's been the way you conveyed the message of prosperity versus profits. I think that's also a great
Thank you.
takeaway for the business owners, HR professionals, and industry leaders listening to us. Yeah, thank you very much for this wonderful the
Pleasure.
insights that
Thank
you
you.
have shared, and thank you, Anil sir, for carrying on with the
Yes.
discussion, the
Very good job.
interaction. That there has been a lot of energy, great energy today. Chief Energy Officer. Thank you very
Yeah.
much once again, Perry, on behalf of
Thank you, Anu.
NIPM Kerala chapter.
Thank you, Anu.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank,
Thank you to
thank,
all the listeners. Yes, thank you very much.
thank you.
Lovely. Thanks
Thank
very
you.
much.